Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Dwayne Brenna, talking about his new collection of short fiction, Theories of Everything. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Worldshapers podcast, where I talk to authors about their latest books. My name is Edward Willett. I am the host. I am myself an author. My next book is called Fireboy. It will be coming out in July. It's a middle grade young adult fantasy adventure. Looking forward to that. I'm also a publisher. Shadowpaw Press is my publishing company. And again, today I'll be talking to one of my Shadowpaw Press authors, Dwayne Brenna, who has a short fiction collection, Theories of Everything, coming out on March 11th, which should be after this goes live, so it's still in the future. So we'll be talking to him momentarily. Just a little bit more about me. I'm a multiply published award-winning author of more than 60 books of science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction for readers of all ages. I mentioned my upcoming book. My most recent book before that was The Tangled Stars, which is a humorous space opera adventure featuring an AI uplifted talking cat who becomes a starship captain. It's out in ebook and audiobook, and that was from Daw Books, which has been my publisher for many years. And also coming up very soon, I have Shapers of Worlds Volume 5, which is an anthology of science fiction and fantasy by authors who were guests of this podcast during its 5th year. At that time, I was only talking to science fiction and fantasy authors. Now I'm talking to a wider range of authors. So that is the final one in that series. But there are 5 volumes of Shapers of Worlds, and some of the top names in science fiction and fantasy have stories in those anthologies. So I hope you will check them out. The new one, Shapers of Worlds Volume 5, comes out on March 24th or 25th. I think it's whatever the Tuesday is when it comes out. I guess it's the 25th. Yeah. So look for that, please. Shadowpaw Press started in 2018. It's named after our cat, the black Siberian cat, Shadowpaw. His picture is our logo. You can see it on the back of the book we'll be talking about today. You can see him down there. And I published probably way more books than I should have, actually, but I published a lot of books and several more still to come this year, including, besides the one we're talking about, Theories of Everything, which comes out next week. We have, after that, there is Cupboard Love, which is a nonfiction book. It's a reprint, a dictionary of culinary curiosities, which is just what it sounds like. It's a very enjoyable and interesting look at where some of the words surrounding eating and food come from that we use all the time, but we may not know what they mean or where they originated from. So that's by Mark Morton, who wrote The Headmasters, a YA science fiction novel that I published about a year ago. And then after that, there is Gods of a New World, which is a near future science fiction story by Ryan Melsom, which involves trillionaires and their influence on technology and nanotechnology and AI and all that stuff rolled up in there. So actually, in many ways, quite timely. That comes out in June. In July is my book, Fireboy. There's a couple of reprints coming up. The Night Girl by James Bow, which is a urban fantasy, YA fantasy set in Toronto. There is Waiting for the Piano Tuner to Die, which is a reprint of a collection of short fiction by Harriet Richards, who's The Lavender Child. I reprinted in December. And then in the fall, there is a new poetry collection by Glenn Sorstad called First Light, Last Light. He's a former poet laureate of Saskatchewan and a recipient of the Order of Canada. He is one of Canada's most popular poets, and looking forward to bringing out his new collection. And also a new collection of short fiction by Betty Jane Hegareth called Elephants in the Room. So that's in the fall. And another reprint. I am reprinting Magebane, which is by Lee Arthur Chayne. Now, Lee Arthur Chayne happens to be me. Magebane was my fourth Daw novel. Those rights have reverted to me along with the previous 3, which I hope to also bring out in new editions. But this is the first one I'm bringing out. It had a starred review in Publishers Weekly when it came out. It's the longest book I've ever written, and it's 150,000 words. I'm looking forward to bringing that out in a new edition through Shadowpaw Press, through Endless Sky Books, my other side of the company, this fall. So all of that is coming up this year. So it's still a busy year here at Shadowpaw Press. And the Worldshapers, I've talked about what's going to happen with it. It's going to continue, and I'm going to start accepting interview requests from other authors or people just reaching out to people I want to talk to is actually probably even more what I'll be doing. I get flooded with requests for interviews, and I might pick one or two of those. Um, but I can't take on everybody that wants to be on the show. So I'll be quite picky about that because it'll only come out, I think, every 2 weeks. I tried doing it every week, and that was too much. I think if I go back to my old schedule of every 2 weeks, I can keep the Worldshapers going. It'll probably still be pretty heavy in science fiction and fantasy, but I will be talking to other people about other kinds of books as well. Anyway, that was a very long-winded introduction. Let's talk about today's guest. We're going to be talking about, as I've already said, Theories of Everything, written by Dwayne Brenna, and I'll just read you his bio, which fortunately is in the back of the book. Dwayne Brenna is the award-winning author of several books of humor, poetry, and fiction. Kato Books published his popular series of humorous vignettes entitled Eddie Gustafson's Guide to Christmas in 2000. His two books of poetry, Stealing Home and Give My Love to Rose, were published by Hagios Press in 2012 and 2015, respectively. Stealing Home, a poetic celebration of the game of baseball, was subsequently shortlisted for several Saskatchewan Book Awards, including the University of Regina Book of the Year Award. His first novel, New Albion, about a laudanum-addicted playwright struggling to survive in London's East End during the winter of 1850-51, was published by Kato Books in autumn 2016. New Albion won the 2017 Muslims for Peace and Justice Fiction Award at the Saskatchewan Book Awards. It was also one of 3 English-language novels shortlisted for the prestigious M.M. Bennett's Award for Historical Fiction. His baseball novel, Long Way Home, was published by Pokol Press in 2022, and his theater history text, Nights That Shook the Stage, published by McFarlane Books, came out in the spring of 2023. His short stories and poems have been published in an array of journals, including Grain, Nine, Spitball, the Antigonish Review, Intima, and Cold Mountain Review. That's Dwayne Brenna, and let's talk to him now. So, Dwayne, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Well, thank you for having me.
I am continuing this podcast, as I tell everybody in the intro, but I'll tell you too. This is episode 189, I think. And as I started out, I was just talking to science fiction and fantasy authors about their creative process. And then once Shadowpaw Press started up, I thought, it'd be nice if I could talk to my own authors about their books. So I kind of refocused it a little bit. And recently, I've just been talking to my authors, although I'll be talking to other people again soon, I hope. And you are one of my authors. So
yes,
your book, this podcast, it'll be out just after this podcast goes live. So shall I hold it up? I'll hold it up.
Please do.
Theories of Everything. Oops, shouldn't cover your name though. Here we go.
That's all right. That's sweet.
And it's
I love that cover.
Collection, yeah. And the cover art is by Bibliofic Designs out of Calgary. She's done a couple of covers for me now, and I'm always happy with them. So anyway, that's what we're going to be talking about. But first, we want to talk about you.
Okay.
So tell me about yourself and where you grew up and how you got started writing and all that good stuff.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a place called Macon, Saskatchewan, which is just down the road from you, down Highway number 6.
Macon? M-A-C-O-U-N?
N-A-I-C-A-M.
Oh, that one. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Between Watson and Melfort.
See, I used to be editor of the Weyburn Review, so I know all the little towns down around Weyburn. There's one called Macon, and I thought for a minute that was the one you were talking about.
Oh, I see. Yeah. No, I had a high school teacher named Terry Chamberlain who was a published author himself, and he got me interested in writing. I think I have something in common with you, actually, Ed, in that my first article ever published was in Western People.
That was my first short story. Yeah.
Was it? Yeah. Mine was nonfiction. It was about a friend of mine who had taken up hang gliding and used to go out behind a snowmobile with a hang glider and go flying up in the air out at the airfield, the airstrip by my hometown. So I wrote this article and I sent it into Western People, and I remember I was just in high school, right? And I remember going in to see Rusty McDonald at the Western Producer facility here in Saskatoon, and he sat me down and he said, "So, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be a writer." And he said, "If I was you, I'd go down to Hollywood and write for the Beverly Hillbillies." So I don't know if that meant I was a hillbilly in his
Maybe he just meant you were funny.
or what it meant. But that was his advice to me. I've often thought about how much fun I would have had working with Jed and Ellie Mae and Jethro Bodine. But that never happened. I ended up going to university here and taking a creative writing course from a guy named H.V. Weeks, who, in fact, I think is, there's a town also in Saskatchewan called Weeks, which I think was named after his family.
Oh, really?
H.V. told me that he had been, I think after the Second World War, he'd made his living partly as a writer and partly as a pool shark. And he said he used to write. He was urging me to do this. He said he used to write for True Confessions.
Oh.
And he said, yes, I've been pregnant and unwed several times, and each at $50 a story.
Yeah, that was a market at one time. There's a very well-known science fiction writer, Connie Willis, and she actually started her career writing for the confessions magazines of the various sorts. So it was kind of lots of people kind of started it. That's not something I ever tried, though.
No, me neither, really. I didn't go there. But I did, I sent poor HB a lot of really crappy stories, but I wrote one finally towards the end of the year, and he said, send this along to a magazine. So I sent it to Grain, and it got published. So, shout out to Grain for publishing that very early short story of mine. I still have a copy somewhere in my bookcases here. I couldn't find it for you right now, but it's somewhere in there. And then I was going to, I had a choice to make, and I was going to I actually got accepted to a creative writing program down in Virginia. But my dad was a dryland farmer, and I remember that summer I spent working in a lumber yard to try to make enough money to go to university, and I got a scholarship from this creative writing program, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover the cost of it. So I went back to school here at the U of S in a graduate program, and I I made the mistake of taking a drama class, an acting class, and Tom Kerr was the head of the drama department at the time, and he was an exciting guy to be around, and it sidetracked my writing career for a while. I ended up going to Stratford for a year and spending another 2 years in Toronto, and then coming back here and trying to finish up a degree and so forth. But through it all, I was writing sort of on the side of my desk, and I got really serious about it sort of in my 40s, and wrote a thing that took a couple of years to get published called New Albion, and it won a Saskatchewan Book Award, and so I thought, no, maybe I'll keep writing, and so I have, and I really settled into that career.
Well,
in 20 years.
The theater thing is something else we have in common, because I've done a lot of theater and a modicum of professional theater, and I'm an equity member and all that stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
So I often say, if the freelance writing doesn't pay off, I'll just fall back on, stage acting, because that's a good, reliable way to make a living.
We've both picked the two professions that are the hardest professions to make money at.
Unfortunately true. And I was in journalism, and even had I stayed in journalism, that's dying now too. So fortunately I married an engineer. That was a really good career move. So the current book is, how many books have you published at this point?
I think there's 8 or 9. I can't remember exactly, but 8 or 9 of them. Starting with, I started doing a thing on CBC Radio called
something else we have in common.
Called the Adventures of Eddie Gustafson, and that was actually the first book I ever published. Kato kind of got a hold of me after that and said, "Why don't you make a book of these?" They were vignettes. They were 3-minute vignettes on CBC radio. But that book has sold miraculously well. So there's been that. I was a house husband in Edmonton. My wife was doing a doctorate in education there. And so I spent a year writing some theater history, but also I sat down. I decided I wanted to write poems, and I sat down. And every morning I would work on this theater history text, which became a history of 25th Street Theater called Our Kind of Work. But in the afternoons, I would write a poem every day. And I thought, well, what am I really, really passionate about, And I decided it was baseball. so I started writing poems exclusively about baseball. And I must have written 150 of them, 100, less than 100 made it into the book. But that book was the easiest book I've ever sold in my life. I sent the manuscript out, and 3 days later, the publisher said, "Yeah, we're gonna do this," and it's in its second printing now. It's called Stealing Home. I take it to ball tournaments and sell it out of the back of my trunk. It's been a bit of a moneymaker, which you wouldn't think of. A poetry book would do that for you, but it's done that.
You found an unexpected niche market.
I did. So yeah, there's been a number of books. Several have been theater history texts. Just recently, McFarland Press down in North Carolina published a book called Nights That Shook the Stage, which is about 40 nights in the theater that changed the course of theater history. But I try to balance between the nonfiction and the fiction, and I just love working on short stories. I really do.
So when did this collection of short fiction start to take shape?
Well, one of the stories in here, a story called Blood Red Polish, was first, saw the light of day in Guy Vanderhaeg's creative writing class many years ago. That's a story about a murderous parrot. And so that was the very first story.
It's one of the more unusual stories in the collection.
Yeah. It's a bit of a horror movie, that story. I really like it though. I took a sabbatical and I went down to Rabun Gap, Georgia, and there's a place down there called the Hambidge Artists Colony, which they made me a fellow of the colony. So I thought I'd better go, and I spent a month down there, and that's when I really got working on the pieces. I met a poet down there who had just been published in Cold Mountain Review, and so I sent one of the stories to Cold Mountain Review, and they published the story. And another story called Respite went to a journal called Intima in California and was published there. And then, yes, I mean, this, kind of like my career, this book has had a labyrinthine journey.
And of course, it actually went to Kato Books, which had published both of us, but then Kato went away. Where was it in the process at that point?
Well, it was accepted. I'd signed a contract, and it was accepted to be published in the coming year. And Kato, of course, went bankrupt during that time. So, yeah, I mean, I heard Dave Carpenter say he was the kiss of death to Kato Books, but I think he can't take the blame entirely onto himself. I think I was partly to blame as well.
I have metaphorically killed a number of publishers who published me and then went out of business, so I kind of thought it was me.
Yeah.
So,
Anyway, I was very happy when Ed, when you took it on.
well, it was recommended to me by Dave Margocius, who, of course, used to do some work with Coteau and is now also doing some editing work for me. And in fact, he was your editor as well. So, what was that process like? Some of these had been previously published. How does Dave work as an editor when it comes to this kind of material?
Well, he's a remarkable guy, but he knows what he wants, and I think about halfway through the book, he kind of took pity on me. I remember there was a story. I think it was Collateral Damage is the story where he gave me so many interventions on the story that I said, well, Dave, I guess I can just rewrite the story then. And so I did. But so that story particularly had a lot of changes in it. But I don't know, he took pity on me for the rest of the book, and the changes weren't quite so drastic as that. So he's a remarkable guy to work with. He was also my editor on New Albion, and I really, got respect for him there. He's also in a writing group with myself and Dave Carpenter, so I get to hear from him every month.
I should, of course, you mentioned Dave Carpenter, but I just interviewed him in the last episode of the Worldshapers because, of course, I got his collection of short fiction called Hello is out
Yes,
now as
yeah,
well. And
yeah,
there's going to be a joint book launch, but we'll talk about that in a minute.
yeah. It's a lovely book, by the way. I really love, the stories in it, but the cover as well.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
turned out
wonderful.
well. And
Yeah.
I designed that cover, so hey.
Oh, there you go.
So just talk a little bit more about what the stories are like in this book. How would you typify them?
Well, I think one of the reasons that the book has had a labyrinthine journey is that they're not linked stories in any way. They're kind of all over the map, but I think that's the strength of the book. Is that some of the stories are set in Saskatoon, some are set in Costa Rica, Hawaii, Mexico, Libya. They're narrated by women, men, parrots. So I thought Theories of Everything was a good title for it. It's also the title of one of the stories.
And of course, it's playing off of the famous Stephen Hawking book, Theory of Everything.
Yeah, yeah. But it really does. It really does encompass a lot of different material. And I hope that the reader will enjoy the sort of the depth and breadth of imagination that went into the stories.
Well, I did, and of course, I gave it a thorough editing pass as well on the sort of the copy editing side. So
Yes,
I looked
yeah,
at all
thank you.
stories very closely, and
Yeah,
yeah, it was great to pull them together. And then you'd actually, well, I'll hold it up again because you talked about how much you liked the cover, and you actually basically suggested what you wanted on the cover. So this is a scene from one of the stories.
Yes, yeah,
the one set in Hawaii, but not the tourist part of Hawaii.
No, sort of the seedier underside of Hawaii. Yeah, as told from the point of view of a 69-year-old man who has lost all his money in the stock market crash and lives out of his car on the beaches of Oahu. So yeah, that's what the cover came from. That's for sure.
How does story creation work for you? Do you start with a plot idea or a character or a setting, or is there anything that's typical, or can it be any or all of the above?
It varies from story to story. The first story in the book is called Savage God, and it's about a rock star who lives in the Juan de Fuca Hotel in Victoria. And I got the idea for that story. I was visiting my friend Bob Faulkner out there, and staying with him. He lives in Victoria, and we were walking across the street, and there was a man in a wheelchair and another man pushing the wheelchair, and they were dressed exactly alike, sort of leathers and sunglasses. And Bob said to me, he said, you know who that is? that's a rock star right there. I can't remember which rock star it was, but that was the initial image that got me into that story. There's another story in the book called "The Sewing Machine," which is almost uninvented. It's just a story that happened in my family. It happened to my grandmother during the Depression, and I changed very little of the reality of what happened. It just basically wrote down the story, and it wrote itself pretty much. So yeah, I mean that was kind of a long-standing story in my family about how the repossession men came during the Depression to take back a sewing machine that she had bought from a local store, and how she rolled up her sleeves and told the repossession man that he'd have to be a better man than she was to take that sewing machine, and he never took it. My mother, who's still alive and living in Saskatoon, was a little girl standing by the stove watching this take place, and she basically told me the story, and I wrote it down. So I stole that one from my mother.
What does your writing? What does your writing process look like? Do you like write in longhand with quill and parchment, or?
Well, I do write in longhand. I do not like the computer so much, and I don't know what it is. It's something about writing in longhand that
my handwriting is so bad that I literally cannot stand to write longhand. I've always hated it. And even as a newspaper reporter, I would take notes. We did, this was in the 80s. So of course I was taking longhand notes, and my handwriting was so bad that I had to immediately write the story when I got back to the office, because if I left it for a day, I couldn't read my own notes. So as soon as I could compose on a typewriter, I started writing on a typewriter. But I have talked to authors who really prefer I don't get it myself, but although it is a different process in the way that the words come out, I think.
Yeah, I think there's something about the connection between the hand and the mind that works for me when I'm writing longhand. I too, well, when I was working on New Albion, I had a typist who I would send my terrible longhand to, and it was so. I remember her saying that my writing was atrocious. And when the book was finally published, I went and gave her a copy because I thought she'd done yeoman's work trying to put this longhand into print for me.
First complete short story I ever wrote, my mother typed it up for me after I gave her the hand, because she had an IBM Selectric at home, and she was a secretary to type 100 words a minute. So she was my typist to begin with.
Wow. I wish I'd have had a mother like that.
She only did the one. After that, I kind of did it myself. But
okay.
Castor Glass Hypership Test Pilot. If I ever find that short story, I'm going to put it online, but it's somewhere in a box. So I have to try it. So what does your revision process look like after you've written a draft? You go back over it, and never mind whatever Dave did to it in the end.
Yeah, I tend to wait a while. Usually I think it's perfect, like the day after I write it, and it's often what I do is take it to my writers group, and they sort of good cop bad cop me a little bit, and then I go home and rewrite it, and it depends on the story, but some stories in this book have been worked on quite a bit, and others tended to sort of write themselves. So sometimes an idea just comes to you as a pearl, and it feels good right away, and it is good right away. Other times you've got to really hone it, and so yeah, I've had that experience, both of those experiences, with the stories in this book.
What about the order of the stories? Did you choose the order? Did Dave contribute to the order of the stories?
No, that was Dave contributing to it. I had a different order altogether. and he kind of noted that some of the stories are quieter stories, and some are rather loud and full of action. And he wanted to make sure that we interspersed the quiet and the loud. So, yeah, I mean, the first story in the book was not the first story in the book when I sent it up. I think when I sent it to you for the first time. But that's how we determined the order of the book.
I didn't go back and compare. I just waited for the edited version to come in.
Yeah.
Well, we should mention that there is book launches coming up, which will still be in the future when this goes live. So maybe somebody will come because they see this.
Yeah.
We set one up at McNally Robinson in McNally Robinson Booksellers, I guess is their formal name, in Saskatoon. And that's on March 20th at 7 p.m. And I'll be there, as will you and Dave Carpenter. And I don't know if Dave Margocious is, I think he's supposed to be there, but
I think so. Yeah.
we will you'll have a launch and hopefully sell some books, and you'll be doing some reading. How do you decide what to read when you do a reading from a short story collection? Do you read an entire short story?
Or I think I will. I think I will, unless you cut me off, Ed, and halfway through. If you put the hook out.
Okay, that's enough of that. No,
I'll know to stop. But I think I'll. It's kind of nice for an audience to hear an entire story rather than sort of leaving them with a cliffhanger.
Yeah, it's one of the advantages of having a short story collection as opposed to reading from a novel. I always struggle with what to read from a novel. That you either have to do so much setup for what's happening in the scene, if it's somewhere in the middle of the novel, or you start at the beginning, but maybe it doesn't advance far enough to really, you don't. Yeah, it's always a challenge.
I almost always start at the beginning with a novel, just because, for two reasons. One is there's less setup.
Yeah.
And the other is probably in order to get that novel published, I've had to work doubly hard on that first chapter anyway. Because if you can't get the first chapter by an editor, you're not going to get it published. So
that's true. Hopefully the opening is strong, because otherwise it wouldn't have been purchased in the first place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, for those two reasons, I usually start with the first. But yeah, in this case, I can probably just pick any story out of here that takes my fancy in the moment and read that.
I would suggest, and you having been on stage as well, I would suggest something that's not so long that the audience starts to shift uncomfortably in their seats.
Okay. Okay, I'll look for one of the shorter stories in the short story collection.
There's, I've never been somebody who actually, nothing against you or anybody else, I would much rather read a story than have the author read it to me, unless they're even if they're a really good reader. I'd still rather read the story. So I've never been one that goes out of my way to go to public readings, and I've done readings, and maybe because of that, I'm always sitting there thinking, am I boring people? Am I boring people? Am I boring people? So I'm probably not the best one to ask. There's a famous quote by Robert A. Heinlein, the science fiction writer, and you've had a poetry book and I've had a poetry book, but one of his quotes was that people who read their poetry in public may have other nasty habits. They tell that to poets and they don't always appreciate the humor, but I think it's funny. And then we're going to do a second book launch here in Regina at Bushwhacker Brew Pub. So that'll be quite different from doing it in the bookstore. The great thing there is that people can have beer and nachos while they're listening to you read if they want to.
Yeah, it's so good. All of my Regina friends are beer and nacho lovers. So,
so make sure they come out.
That'll be a big draw.
That's on March 24th. So I'll be up in Saskatoon, and then you'll be down here in Regina on March 24th for that one. And of course, at Saskatoon, they'll be selling books at the bookstore. And down here, I will be selling books. I will have a selection of Shadowpaw titles, but especially the two that are being launched. So really looking forward to that. What are you working on now?
Oh, I've been working on a few different things. One is a nonfiction piece, just based on 1 year in my life, and one is a Western novel. We'll see where that goes. But yeah, those two things.
Western or a Western, like a
1884 Western.
Classic.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be good. It's an exciting time to write about, and I don't know. 1884 was was the birth date of my grandfather, and I was very close to this grandfather. I remember showing a picture of him to my sons, and I, he was dressed in this 1884 suit. Well, no, 1895 suit probably, but I said, "Yeah, your dad knew somebody really well who was born in 1884." So yeah, just part of getting into that novel was trying to kind of rationalize what went on, at a time when my grandfather was born and how this land was settled and so forth. So that's part of the lure of the book for me.
And what kind of online presence do you have? Where can people find you online?
Oh, I'm on Dwayne Brenna .com, all lowercase, all one word. And so I'm also on LinkedIn and stuff like that. But DwayneBrenna.com is where you can see all my books and hear the news, whatever news you want to hear about me. But that's where it is.
Okay. Well, thanks for being on, Dwayne, and talking about the book. I'm looking forward to the book launches, and they're coming up pretty quick. The book itself releases on March 11th. It'll be available everywhere. If it's not in your local bookstore, they can order it, and you can find it on all the online retailers. Anyway, you should be able to find it everywhere, is what I'm trying to say. So thanks for being on, and best of luck as we get this book out into the world.
Thanks, Ed. We'll look forward to the launch and seeing you in Saskatoon.
Bye for now. And thanks again to Dwayne for that great conversation. He's fun to talk to, and I hope you enjoyed our chat as much as I did. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. Just a few reminders. You can find The Worldshapers online at theworldshapers.com, where you'll find a page about the book and a little bit more about Dwayne, and links to the audio-only version as well. All of the episodes of The Worldshapers have their own little page on the Worldshapers website. You can find The Worldshapers on X at The Worldshapers. You can find it on Facebook at The Worldshapers. You can find me, assuming you want to, at edwardwillett.com. That's my name, right? Oh, nope, it's over here. There we go. edwardwillett.com, on X at ewillett, on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor, and on Facebook at edward.willett, because I just didn't manage to get all my handles the same everywhere. Shadowpaw Press, which published the book we talked about today and others that we have talked about, you can find at shadowpawpress.com. You can find it on X at Shadowpaw Press. You can find it on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press, and you can find it on Facebook at Shadowpaw Press. That one, I got everything the same for. That's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. As I said, I will be back. I am going to carry on probably every 2 weeks, and I'll continue to talk to a variety of authors about their latest books. Thanks for watching and or listening. Bye for now.